that there are two types of sources of Hindu law. Firstly, the ancient source, and the another one is the modern source of Hindu law. Today, we are going to deal with the modern sources of Hindu law. Now, let us see what are the modern source of Hindu law. So, firstly, the modern source of Hindu law is the judicial decisions, legislations, and equity, good conscience, and justice, or you may even call it to be a justice, equity, and good conscience. Now, first, the judicial decisions. Now, judicial decisions plays a very important role, and whenever we speak about the judicial decisions role in considering it to be a source of Hindu law, it becomes very important that the judicial decisions must be of such a nature which very precautionary without hurting the um, uh, without hurting the feeling of the people, without hurting the sanctity of something. These particular decisions come in front. So, judicial decisions are considered to be a modern source of Hindu law for the reason earlier we were not having a court system. Earlier, we were not having so whatever the decision taken by the group of people, or whatever the decision taken by the person whom we declare to be a judge, or in the present day context, the decisions of the judicial authority or a court have become nowadays a very important of source of law. Aspect of the Hindu law contained in Shruti and Smriti are silent in many respects and on many points. Why we consider the judicial decision to be important source of Hindu law? Because there are the situation wherein we may not get any guideline from Shruti, or we may not get any guideline from Smriti. Whenever a situation comes, we need to be resolved, or the conflict need to be resolved, but we do not have any of the guideline from the Shruti, or we do not get any guideline from the Smriti. Then in that case, how that particular conflict or how that particular question will be solved? In that situation, this judicial decisions or the role played by the court becomes very important. If we take into consideration the Privy Council during the British Indian time, this even Privy Council, they tried to fulfill these areas and deficiencies with certain rules. Because at that time the personal laws were in existence. When the Britishers they came in India and they found that for the purpose of administration it became very difficult, for the reason the Indians are having their personal laws, and the Hindu law need to be applied over the Hindus, and the Muslim law need to be applied over the Muslims. So there was no uniformity of the law, and hence it became very difficult for, and even among the Hindus there were very there were variation of classes wherein it was very difficult to apply one rule over one community and thereby to solve the conflict, and use the similar rules to be applied over the other community. So these are the reasons the Indian courts, we would say, try to fill up this basically areas and the deficiencies which were there while deciding any of the conflict between the parties, because of the absence of any Shruti or Smriti guideline, and hence they tried to make some rule. The British Indian, they tried to make some rule. The rule which they tried to make were with the view to fill up the areas and the deficiencies, so that the entire body of any procedure or rule would be made available in order to solve the situation of similar nature if suppose arise in future. So the judicial decisions of the Privy Council, and later on the establishment of Supreme Court, and later on the Supreme Court, are binding on all the courts of India. So whatever the decision given by the Privy Council and the decision given by the Supreme Court after the establishment of Supreme Court, it became binding that whatever the decision given by the Privy Council and Supreme Court is there, it would be having a binding effect over all the courts in India. The judges used to enumerate the law while deciding that particular law. What the judges used to do, if whenever any case comes before these particular judges, this particular judge used to enumerate the law while deciding this particular matter, and the judicial decision of this court becomes the source of law. In other words, it would be said that the precedent, because whenever a court decides any of the matter, whenever a court decides any of the matter for which no guidelines is available, neither in the form of a shruti, neither in the form of a smriti, nor in the form of a commentary or digest or something like that, whatever the ancient sources are actually absent for the purposes of defining or for the purposes of resolving the conflict in the present case, then in that case, the court used to enumerate the law, and while enumerating the law, they used to consider each and every aspect that could be covered under that particular law in that particular case, so far as from that particular case point of view is concerned, and whatever the decision the court used to give is to become a precedent of that particular court. And this particular precedent would act as a guideline for the similar kind of future coming matters. So, this precedent of the code are not only the evidence of law, they were not proven to be, or they were not being considered to be an evidence of law, but they have also simultaneously became a source of law. And the subordinate courts were bound to observe these precedents, because as we said, whatever the decision of Privy Council and the Supreme Court were there, they used to be having a binding effect over the subordinate court. So whatever the precedent being given by the Supreme Court or the Privy Council, that particular precedent used to considered as a binding, having a binding effect over the subordinate court, and the subordinate court were bound to observe this precedent. Though directly judicial decision is not a source of law, but because it modify and supplement the law. What does it do? The judicial decisions modify and supplement the law, and because it modify and supplement the law, it became a source of law. So this is nothing but a modern source of Hindu law. Judicial decisions are modern source of Hindu law. Next, if we take into consideration the next source, that is the legislation. Yesterday we saw n number of legislations which has now been proven to be a source of law. Before these particular legislation came into existence, everything was actually the conflicting relating to that particular situation used to be resolved on the basis of the rank of the parties, on the basis of considering the factors which were not actually relevant to that particular matter, and hence a lot of confusion used to be there. But in order to remove all those confusions, the British people enacted certain acts, and these enactments were made for bringing a reformation under Hindu law, and hence because Hindu law is an uncodified, so whosoever ruler used to come, he used to make his own rules. And in order to avoid these practices, the Britishers passed certain acts, certain legislations, and these legislations, because were from the reformative point of view, and hence have been considered to be a source of Hindu law. So the legislation are also a modern source of Hindu law. Some of the examples of legislation relating to Hindu laws are the Caste Disability Removal Act 1850. Now, the Caste Disability Removal Act 1850, as we all knew that we were having a caste system very strictly followed in India in the early ages, and because of this, many discrimination used to be done with the people, and sometimes it was very inhuman discrimination. And in order to remove all these things, a Caste Disability Removal Act 1850 was passed. Later on, the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act, because we knew earlier the widows were never been considered to have a right to remarry, but for the purposes of bringing a reform in these practices, the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act, which was passed in the year 1856. Next is Hindu Inheritance Act 1928. Earlier, because the people of India, Hindu people were actually being governed or is covered under or are covered under two schools, the Mitakshara and Dayabhaga. Mitakshara and Dayabhaga school also deals with the topics of inheritance and succession. Under the basically Mitakshara and Dayabhaga, we were having two different system of inheritance. The first system of inheritance speaks about whosoever the remaining family members are there, and that too only the male would be having a right of inheritance and not the female. Female members would only have a right to be maintained out of that particular property. There are the other basically rules of inheritance also in another schools. Like for example, once the son get a property, once the partition been made of that particular property, and whatever the portion the father gets, the son is going to get out of that particular property only. But the rule of inheritance again it says that whosoever is member living at the time of living at the time living at the time when the partition is not done, then in that case whosoever a male member basically takes birth in that particular family would have a right over that particular property. So one rule says that the person gets a right over that particular property by virtue of taking birth in that particular family itself, and one rule says that the person would get a right only after the demise of the father. Only after the demise of the father the child is going to get a right of inheritance over the father's property, which we call it to be a succession one. So these were different type of actually the inheritance rules were prevailing in the early days, and in order to remove the confusion or in order to resolve the conflict of inheritance among Hindus, the Hindu Inheritance Act in 1928 was passed. Next legislation we can say is the Hindu Gains of Learning Act in 1930, the Hindu Women's Right to Property Act 1937, the Hindu Marriage Act 1955, the Hindu Succession Act 1956, the Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act 1956, the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act 1956. These are all some of the examples of the legislation which are proven to be a modern source and which now and then tells us about what could be the good Hindu law or what could be the rule under Hindu law from different point of view, maybe from the point of view of caste disability, maybe from the point of view of widow remarriage, maybe from the point of view of inheritance, maybe from the point of view of gain of learning act, maybe from the point of view of women having a right in the property, maybe from the point of view of Hindu Marriage Act, maybe from the point of view of succession, maybe from the point of view of Minority and Guardianship Act, and maybe in the form of adoption and maintenance. And there are several other legislations too, which are there in existence, which I have not listed out because there are n numbers. But now and then we would say that these legislations, though may be passed in the year 1850 or prior to that, and still we are making n number of legislation, these has now become or has been considered to be a legal modern source of Hindu law. Now next is the justice, equity and good conscience. So justice, equity and good conscience are also the modern source of Hindu law, because we knew whenever the ancient source is not available, whenever the modern source is not available, whenever there is no reference being made available for the purposes of resolving any of the conflict between the parties in any of the matter before the court, then in that case on the basis of justice, equity and good conscience, these principles of justice, equity and good conscience are the principles which has been followed by the British people in the British Parliament even before the enactment of any of the British laws in their time. So that particular principle they even applied in the Indian court also. But the Indian court, while applying, though may be having a judges of judges or British judges, or later on we would say even after the independence of India, the Indian judges, the rule of justice, equity and good conscience has played a very important role in resolving the conflict between the parties and has been proven to be a guideline for the future coming matters. For example, के तौर पे, but whatever the principles of equity which was applied in the British Parliament used to have a different notion of equity while application in the Indian court. So equity notion is different or may vary from case to case and person to person, and also the authority who is actually been given an authority to decide the matter. So equity, good conscience and justice, though are the principles which been obtained or which we have adopted from the British Parliament, but has to some extent been proven to be a modern source of Hindu law because in absence of any kind of ancient or the modern sources as we have listed out, like in absence of Shruti, like in absence of Smriti, like in absence of commentary and digest, and in absence of any of the custom, in absence of any of the judicial decision or the legislation, the only way left to us in order to resolve the conflict is the principles of equity, good conscience, and justice, with the help of which we can resolve the conflict between the parties. And hence, these are two important sources of Hindu law. So, let us take a revision of the same judicial decisions. So, aspect of Hindu law contained in Shruti and Smriti were silent in many respects and on many points. So, on the basis of this, the silent areas and the points of the court of that time, that is the Privy Council and the British court, to try to fill up this particular areas and the deficiencies with certain rules. The judicial decisions of Privy Council, and later the Supreme Court are binding on all the courts of India. The judges enumerated the law while deciding the particular case, and the judicial decisions of this court became a source of that particular law. Though directly the judicial decision is not a source of law, but it modify and supplement the law. Next is the legislations. As we have seen, we have also discussed n number of legislations. Some of the examples of the legislations has been given here. The first, Caste Disability Removal Act 1850, the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act 1856, the Hindu Inheritance Act 1928, the Hindu Gains of Learning Act 1930, the Hindu Women's Right to Property Act 1937, the Hindu Marriage Act 1955, the Hindu Succession Act 1956, the Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act 1956, the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act 1956 are some of the examples of the legislation as has been proven to be a modern source in understanding what the Hindu law is. Now, next is, and the last one is justice, equity, and good conscience. Justice, equity, and good conscience helps in the administration of Hindu law and hence is one of the important source of Hindu law. So, as today we have seen the modern sources of Hindu law, we have completed our full length question, that is discussed at length what are the sources of Hindu law and wherein we have seen both the sources, the ancient as well as the modern sources. I hope you have understood the concept, and I